Hi everyone. Happy Wednesday, as we call it hump day, but hump day, Wednesday, all of those are just a label. No matter which day you're at, which moment you're at, hope you can start that moment at that day as if it's anew, no matter which day it is. And with that in mind, it's 7:03 p.m. I hope this is a new moment for you, and every moment from now to the end of this session is a new moment for us to rejoice in the Dharma together and learn something new. So today we have the many expressions of love with Venerable Dhammika. Bhante was born in Australia in 1951 and became a monk in India in 1976. He trained in Sri Lanka and later taught there for 20 years and subsequently spent another 20 years in Singapore, finally returning to Australia in 2017. Bhante's many books and articles on Buddhism have been translated to numerous languages. His most recent offering is an in-depth study of Buddha's life based on only the information preserved in the Pali Canon. So as always, this will be an interactive session. It will be recorded and uploaded to YouTube, but your names will be de-identified. And without further ado, over to you, Venerable.
Right, thank you for that. And we're going to start with a short meditation, yes? Right, okay. So those of you who are participating with us, just for a few moments, close your eyes. Arrange your body into a comfortable posture, keeping your back straight without being rigid. And when your body is still, the only thing that's moving is your breath. So just watch your breath moving in and out. Notice the in-breath and the out-breath. Gently in and gently out. In and out. Now move your attention from your breath and place it on your solar plexus, the center of your chest. And with your attention focused on your chest, wish yourself well, bless yourself with these words. May I be well and happy. May I be peaceful and calm. May I be protected from dangers. May I achieve my aspirations. May my mind be free from hatred. May my heart be filled with love. May I be well and happy. And think of someone close to you, someone whose presence you cherish. And extend a blessing to them also. May that person be well and happy. May they be peaceful and calm. May they be protected from dangers. May they achieve their aspirations. May their minds be free from hatred. May their hearts be filled with love. May they be well and happy. Now think of a neutral person, someone you see often, but towards whom you have no feelings for or against. Think of one such person. And extend a blessing to them. May they be well and happy. May they be peaceful and calm. May they be protected from dangers. May they achieve their aspirations. May their minds be freed from hatred. May their hearts be filled with love. May they be well and happy. And think of someone you do not like, someone who irritates you, someone who doesn't like you. And take this opportunity to extend a blessing to them also. May that person be well and happy. May they be peaceful and calm. May they be protected from dangers also. May they achieve their aspirations. May their minds be freed from hatred. And their hearts be filled with love. May they be well and happy. May they also be well and happy. May everyone I know be well and happy. May all beings be well and happy. Now take your attention from the center of your chest and focus once again on the in and out movement of your breath. Breathing gently in and breathing gently out. Now finish your meditation and open your eyes. Okay. Right. This evening I'm going to talk about or share with you some of my ideas about a very popular subject, love. Something that is talked about so often, something which everybody feels that they need or need more of, but about which I think there's quite a lot of misunderstandings, particularly amongst Buddhists. I have tried this experiment a few times before, and each time I did it, it had pretty much the same effects. To a Buddhist audience, I would ask them, what's the first thing you think of when you hear the word love? And inevitably they say attachment, sensuality, clinging. For reasons I'm not sure, almost everybody has a positive impression of love, except Buddhists. They only seem to have a positive attitude towards metta. And I think it is easy to have such an attitude towards that. But this neglects the fact that there are many types of love. And it's those that I would like to share some ideas with you this evening. But before you do that, or before we do that, we need to know what love is. And this is where it becomes complicated. What is love? So I've heard people refer to having sex as making love. I've seen movie stars getting an award, the Academy Awards or something like that. and maybe one or the other holds up their trophy and looks out at the audience and says, "I love you all." But surely the majority of the people in the audience, 2,000 or 3,000, they haven't met them all. They don't have an emotional relationship with other than maybe a few. So it seems to me that this word is thrown around quite a lot without perhaps thinking about what is this thing we call love. So having given this some thought, and having read quite a lot of studies of love, and you would be surprised, there are quite a lot of academic studies of this phenomenon. And this is a definition that I've come up with. This is my definition of love. Love is an active interest in, care for, empathy towards, and a desire for intimacy with another or others, usually accompanied by positive feeling. Having thought about this quite a lot, I'm satisfied that this would cover most expressions of love. Everything from loving your spouse, to loving your grandparents, to loving your pets. Love is an active interest in, care for, empathy towards, and a desire for intimacy with another or others, usually accompanied by positive feeling. So there are 5 things I've included in this definition. The first is an active interest in another or others. It seems to me that when you love somebody, you really are interested in them. You want to know everything about them. I think when people first fall in love, they're always, she looks at him and she says, "What are you thinking?" She even wants to know what he's thinking. But it's more than just, it's not a detached interest. It's an involved interest. And that leads to the second definition, which is care for. When you love somebody, or indeed when you love something, an inanimate object, you care about it. Its welfare, you really care about that person or that object. But although we often say that we love Spain, we had a great holiday in Spain, we loved Spain, or we love chocolate cake or Chinese food or something like that, I don't think this, my definition, includes inanimate objects. Because the next definition is empathy towards. I do not think that you can have empathy towards an inanimate object. And what is empathy? Empathy is the ability to get out of yourself and to enter into the feelings of others. So when you have empathy, you have 2 qualities that the Buddha talked about. One is mudita, joy, happiness in the happiness of others. When they're happy, you're happy. When they pass the exams, you're elated as they are. And the other thing you have is compassion. Co-passion, feeling with, that's what it means. So this double aspect of empathy. On one hand, you are happy when you see the loved person happy. You are sad when you see or you're concerned when you see the loved person unhappy. So an aspect of love, as I understand it, is empathy towards the thing that is loved. And then a desire for intimacy. Now, if you're talking about love, and you mention a desire for intimacy, immediately most people would think of sex, which is certainly an expression of intimacy. But we can be intimate with people in quite a lot of other ways. So when somebody is grieving, you put your hand over their shoulder, or that's physical intimacy. You might even cry with them. If they're sobbing, you may even cry with them, like at a funeral. Or when you meet a loved person that you haven't seen for a long time, you might give them a hug. You might, the desire for intimacy might be sharing things with the other person. You know, sometimes spouses share toothbrush. I've been told that. So intimacy can also involve sharing secrets, which is interesting because the Buddha specifically says, he mentions this, that a loving friend will share his or her secrets with you. They may even want to share. And that's an expression of intimacy also. So we have an active interest in, care for, empathy towards, and a desire for intimacy. And then I finish by saying, usually accompanied by positive feeling. Now, having talked to people and discussed this issue with people a lot, people often tell me they're surprised that positive feeling need not necessarily be present when there is love. And I think that is true. I think maybe people overemphasize, give a bit too much emphasis to a connection between love and positive feeling. Now, there is no doubt that certain types of love will give rise to sometimes almost ecstatic positive feeling, joy, elation, but not always. For example, a nurse, a good nurse, she can have, or he can have all those characteristics I mentioned without any positive feeling. Now, the positive feeling may come later. Say, for example, that nurse has looked after that patient for 3 weeks while they're in hospital, just doing her job. Matter of fact, no nonsense, doing what needs to be done for the welfare of the patient. No positive feeling at all. But when that patient leaves, and maybe when that patient thanks that nurse, oh yes, positive feeling may arise then. Or that nurse may think later about how fortunate he or she was to be able to help that patient go from a state of crisis to a state of decent health. But at the actual time of love, positive feeling may not necessarily be there. And that's why I have said usually, but not always, accompanied by positive feeling. Now, you're talking about love or loving kindness. The first thing that pops into a Buddhist mind is metta. It's quite a nice word. The Sanskrit equivalent is maitri. We are told that the next Buddha will be called Maitreya, the loving one. And in most books I've read on Buddhism, and goodness me, I have read a lot, there's usually something about love, about metta. But there are so many other types of love that the Buddha talks about, which I'd have to say I have rarely, if ever, seen discussed or mentioned in discourses on Buddhism by Buddhists. Now, when I wrote my book on this subject, in Pali, I found at least 19 words for love. 19. Exactly what expression of love some of them are, it's hard to say nowadays. But for example, adara really means conjugal love. Attakama, self-love, attakama. In our culture, because of our religious heritage, we tend to think that loving yourself is a negative thing. But the Buddha didn't think so. Not in all cases. Attakama, to love yourself. Peteya, fatherly love. Metteya, motherly love. Pema, it sort of means something like devotional love. You know, all these love songs about I'm devoted to you. Pema. Here's an interesting one, sinea. It literally means oily. Oily, what's that got to do with love? It means two things rubbing together smoothly because they are lubricated, as it were. In other words, two persons coming into contact and no friction between them. Sinea. And of course, metteya, friendship love. Now, I could add more to it, and indeed the Buddha in some of his discourses does mention other types of love. Love of animals, for example. Some people have you'd have to say, a genuine love for animals, or for an animal, their pet dog or their pet cat. And the Buddha has things to say about all of these things. Conjugal love, that is love between a husband and a wife or two partners. I just mentioned conjugal love. There you go, you see, my memory's gone. Love of between parents and children, etc. He says a lot about that. But the type of love that the Buddha talks about more than any other type is friendship love, the love between friends. So there are at least, Buddha talks about at least 3 different levels of friendship love and has a lot to say about it. Sakha is sort of ordinary friendship. Somebody you know, maybe you work with them, or maybe your neighbor. You get on well together, but you're not really emotionally involved. Metta sahada. This means something like a bosom friend. This is the person you went to school with and you've kept in contact since then, and you're quite close. You really like each other. It's a very nourishing experience if you have it. And Kalyana Mitta or Kalyana Mitra. This is, Kalyana literally means beautiful. That's the meaning of it. But we can translate it as spiritual friend, because you can have a spiritual friend who may not necessarily be physically beautiful. Their beauty is of another type. It's a spiritual type. And the Buddha has a lot to say about this. And I think one of the reasons the Buddha talked about this type of love more than any other is because all the best relationships you have with people should be a type of friendship, close friendship, loving friendship. The best husband or the best wife or the best partner is also your best friend. I've heard people say, my father is my best friend, or my mother is also my best friend. So if you look at what the Buddha says about friendship, he gives a great deal of attention to the characteristics of this type of friendship. And in a sense, most of those can be filtered down into the other types of friendship. So I think we Buddhists may be missing out a bit, that we pay so much attention to metta to the degree that we don't give very much attention to these other types of love. Incidentally, in my book on this subject, I also talked about another type of, well, several other types of love. But one I included also was forbidden love. Oh. What is forbidden love? This is a particular type of love which is forbidden, taboo, perhaps even illegal, and yet people do it nonetheless. This is more common than you would think. The people sometimes even risk their life to love another person, to express their love to another person. For example, in India, every year, young people of one caste fall in love with somebody of another caste, and they often pay with their life for that. It's shockingly common. It didn't happen very much in the past, 50, 100 years ago, because the caste it simply was impossible. But now with people from different groups, going to school together, going to university together, perhaps working together, such relationships develop despite the barriers to it, and yet they persist. So this is an interesting type of love also. What are the qualities that are needed? What are the virtues needed that you would risk your life to express your love to another person? Moving along, now disappeared. Moving along, now I'd like to talk about something related to love, which I hear very frequently. I hear people say, oh, metta is unconditional love. Or I loved him or I loved her unconditionally. Or that mother has an unconditional love towards her children. Unconditional. Well, There may be such a thing, but according to Buddhism, everything is conditioned. That is, it comes into being dependent upon certain factors. There may be a lot of these factors. These things come together, they converge, and something arises from that. Is there such a thing as unconditional love? As a Buddhist, I don't think so. Not only because that would be at odds with the Buddhist understanding of reality, but also because when I've heard of or been told about examples of unconditional love, I looked at them and I said, well, there were conditions. There certainly were conditions. That if one of those conditions was absent, that love would take a different form or perhaps disappear. So I have actually heard people say that that couple love each other unconditionally, and then 3 or 4 years later, they're involved in a divorce with each other. In a magazine, I read of a woman who had nursed one of her children who had terrible medical problems, and she persisted with nurturing this child through thick and thin and all sorts of obstacles and difficulties. And in the article, it said that she had an unconditional love for her child. But then there was an interview with her where she said, I couldn't have done it without the help of my husband. Well, if that is so, then certainly her love was conditioned. That's not to belittle her love, but she herself said that she couldn't have done it without the support of her husband. In other words, that love was possible because of at least one condition. So to say that love, even metta, is conditional is not to diminish it, but simply look at it more realistically. My understanding is that even metta is conditioned. So just to reiterate, to say that love is conditioned is not to diminish it. It's simply to look at it more realistically. Now, this leads naturally to the idea of metta, and particularly what in Buddhism is called the 4 Brahmaviharas, the 4 divine states, or the 4 godlike ways of living. Most informed Buddhists know about these things. You have metta, karuna, mudita, and upekkha. Love or loving kindness, love, compassion, sympathetic joy, and equanimity. Now, these states are usually looked at as 3 separate states. I'm going to talk about them as 3 modes of love, 3 ways of expressing love. So this is how I see it. When you're in the company of somebody, well, you just love them. You get on well together. You feel more complete when you're in their company. I would say that metta is the most appropriate way of expressing your love to that person or people. But people are not happy all of the time, unfortunately. How you express your love to them is when you meet them, you say, oh, great to see you again. You want to share things with them. You want physical and psychological intimacy with them. You smile when you meet them, and they do that to you also. You give them a hug, whatever. Perhaps you sleep with them. But not everybody is happy all of the time. Sometimes people are distressed, they're grieving, they're depressed, they're sad. So if you expressed your love towards them in the same way as you did to this other person, with metta, this would be completely inappropriate. If you went to a funeral and there is the loved ones of the person who has died, and you go up to them and slap them on the back, hey, it's so glad to see you, isn't it terrific, fantastic. This would be completely inappropriate. Now, how love has to express itself is in a very different way. Now you have to put your arm over their shoulder, perhaps cry with them, express your sympathy, offer to help them in any way you can. Certainly it would be inappropriate to have a smile on your face, to be ebullient. Now you have to speak and act in a very different way. In other words, the most appropriate way of expressing your love towards somebody who is unhappy or grieving or down is with compassion. But not everybody is always unhappy. Sometimes the good times have come for them. They passed the exams, or they just got married, or won the lottery. You definitely want to be friendly with somebody who's just won the lottery, I tell you. Now, putting your hand over their shoulder and trying to comfort them, once again, it'd be simply inappropriate. Now you rejoice with them. When I was young, I lived in a small northern New South Wales town, and there was a church there just near where I lived, and it was a popular venue for young people getting married. Not because they were religious, but because it was quite a pretty church. I don't know, New South Wales Gothic or something like that. It was quite a picturesque. It made a good backdrop for wedding photographs. And sometimes when I would walk past there, particularly on Saturdays and Sundays, there would be a wedding there. Cars parked out the front, people milling around. Sometimes the happy couple coming out. But this is the interesting thing. Very frequently, I would see 4 or 5 elderly ladies, often there. And the reason they came was they just found it wonderful and delightful to see young people getting married. And once I actually stopped to see this marriage, and I noticed one of these elderly ladies, she just went up to this young bride and said, "Dear, we're so happy for you." And I realized that these ladies simply went there to have the joy of, even at a distance, sharing, seeing and sharing that young couple's happiness. That's a very good example of mudita. I don't know who they are. I don't even know what their name is. But look how happy they are. And their happiness fills me with happiness. That's mudita. And so mudita would be the opposite of envy. One of the least attractive psychological characteristics. I just can't stand that other person passing the exam or winning the lottery. So if you have mudita, boy, you get double the happiness, double the sense of delight. It's a wonderful quality. So this is the appropriate way that love expresses itself towards people who are happy. And then we've got people who are not nice. And there are a lot of nasty people in the world. And if you don't believe me, contact me later and I'll give you the address of a few of them. So the normal way of relating to such people is to dislike them back. We may even dislike them so much that we hope or perhaps even plan to do something nasty to them. Or maybe they've never done anything nasty to us, but we've seen them do something nasty to somebody else, or the way they speak, or perhaps some of the opinions they hold we find offensive. So this is where we understand my definition of love. When people hear the sound, love your enemies, everybody agrees with that, but I think very few people actually do, although a few may try. But most people, actually, if you think about this, is it actually possible to love your enemies in the way love is normally understood? I would say for most people it isn't. Maybe for a few very saintly people. Would it even be appropriate to treat that nasty person the way you would treat your spouse or your children? I don't think that would even be good. So this is the problem. Well, this is one of the problems of the popular idea of love, which is always associated with positive feeling. Pol Pot, oh, he's such a wonderful person. We invited him to our wedding. Nobody's going to do this. You don't feel happy when you meet, I don't know, Stalin or people like this. Okay. What's the approach? How does love express itself to people who are nasty? With upekkha, with equanimity. You'll just blow the top off your head if you try to love your enemy the way you think of love as it normally is. The feelings you have towards your grandparents or your parents or your children or something. You can't do that to such a person. And I would go as far as to say you shouldn't. The most appropriate way, the most loving way to relate to unpleasant people is with equanimity. Even equanimity of a type that borders on indifference. Now, even that may be difficult. But if you can manage that, or at least try that, in time, once you've established an equanimous attitude towards that person, maybe your equanimity can then move up a bit and become compassion and feel genuinely sorry for them. What a pity that that person has so many talents in certain ways, but they're so obnoxious. What a pity. So few friends. People keep away from them. And once your equanimity has been transformed into compassion, in time, it may even become a higher type of love, maybe even metta. So, just to summarize, my idea is it can be useful to think of the four Brahmaviharas not as four separate states, but four appropriate ways to express love to people in different situations. So these are just some ideas that I'd like to share with you about the different expressions of love. And with that, I would invite anybody who has any questions to come forward and ask them.
Thank you so much, Bhante Dhammika. That's really interesting, your analysis of the different states of love, not as different states, but rather as different expressions. So the four Brahmaviharas, as you say, is often discussed in that these are separate qualities or separate four immeasurable minds that we develop. But it makes a lot of sense when we see them as really expressions of love in different contexts. So thank you for sharing about that. We do have some questions. So one question is this. So thank you, Bhante, for pointing out that if metta is conditioned, what are the proximate causes or conditions for it to arise?
Good. Very good question. In fact, I'm glad that's the first question.
Yeah, we have some intelligent people in the group today.
Good, good. Well, trying to think of something. It's there, it's just not coming out. The first thing is, and I think this is rather interesting, you've got to want to love. I remember once a person had come to me asking me to teach them meditation, and which I did do, and she came to me frequently. And occasionally she would talk about one of her relatives in a really negative way. It was clear this person had got under her skin. So I suggested to her to do Metta Bhavana, loving kindness meditation, which she did do. And after seeing me several times, I said, "How's it going?" She said, "Very well." And I said, "So you think of a loved person, yourself, a loved person, a neutral person, and then somebody you dislike?" "Yes." I said, that cousin of yours, do you include them in the person? "Absolutely not. I'm not going to do that for them. Well, they've never done anything for me," and so on and so on and so on. So she had made a decision, I'm not going to love that person. She did this to me, or she did that. This I will not forget. Okay, so if that attitude isn't there, of course, then you're hamstrung from the beginning. So the first thing is you've got to want to. You've got to see the value of it. And the value of coming to terms with irritation or desire for revenge is very good. It's good for you. It's certainly good for others as well. The second thing is, I think, being honest about what you do feel about certain people. My experience of talking to people and of people telling me about their lives, and when you're a Buddhist monk, for some reason or other, people really open up towards you. My feeling is that most people have one, maybe two people who they just cannot stand. They really dislike them strongly. We may even use the word loathe or hate. And then we have a long string of people who, you know, my brother-in-law, God, he's a pain in the neck, and people who we don't hate. We find it trying to be in their company. So I think that giving some thought to this and starting with these people who just irritate you, they're just a pain in the neck, they just get under your skin. Start dealing with them. If you can come to terms with a person who you just don't like, you complain about them to your friends when they're not there. But you snub them a bit when in company. If you can work with them, I think that's a very good exercise too. Once again, it shows that you want to change, you want to evolve, you want to, like a lotus, grow out of all this resentment and etc. And after a while, because I've done this myself, after a while, people who you really just, you'd prefer not to be in their company. And then after a while you think, well, he's not that bad, I suppose. And the interesting thing is his wife loves him. His kids love him. Why can't I? And someday you think like this, you see, actually the problem is you. You're very petty, you're very picky, you're very demanding. So this is a very good exercise in having a good look, a good honest look at yourself. So I think that that is a very good thing too. And another thing I think of, I think is very important, is doing loving kindness meditation. Now, I've heard people say this, meditation teachers say this. In fact, I've heard it often. When you're angry, do metta. Oh, no. I think there's a big mistake. I think when you're angry, the best thing to do is to be angry. Trying to smother it or cover it over with anger, may you be well unhappy. I don't think this is a very good idea at all. Get over your anger. Soothe it. Time is very good at soothing anger. Maybe then. When is the best time to do the meditation? Well, we mentioned before that one of the characteristics of love is that it is usually associated with positive feeling, not always. But there is a close connection between love, all types of love. Conjugal love and love of parents and children, all that. Love of your pets. There's a close connection between them. They often go hand in hand, although not always. The best time to do metta is when you're feeling positive. And a very good time to do metta when you're positive is if the positive feeling has arisen because of the meditation that you're doing. So if you have a regular practice, it is bound to happen that sometimes it's a struggle. At other times, you can go okay. And at other times, every now and then, a very positive feeling waves over you. You find that joy has arisen. It may not be jumping for joy. It may be just a sanguine, peaceful, pleasant state. That's a good time to stop doing whatever meditation you're doing and do metta. But you can do it at other times too, walking along the beach, watching the waves come in and out. Perhaps there's a beautiful sunset, and just you're struck by how beautiful the world can be. Go further up the beach, sit in the sand, You don't have to sit cross-legged and look holy. Just sit there and do Metta Bhavana. Or you're walking through the forest. And the beams of sunlight coming through the leaves, just very beautiful. And you're just aware of how attractive it is, how peaceful. Sit on a bench and just close your eyes and do Metta Bhavana. So my idea is that there are these things. First of all, you've got to want to do. You've got to want to come to terms with negative feelings and developing metta. Second thing is have a good hard look at yourself, particularly at people who you don't hate them, but you've got irritated by them or something like that, and come to terms with them. And the third thing is a regular practice of metta. So I think there are 3 positive things that you can do.
Great advice. Thank you so much, Bhante. I have some questions here. Next one is, how can an individual self-assess when they have reached the stage of loving someone? Often we believe we might love someone or something, but afterwards those feelings dissipate. What could possibly have changed?
What can I say? Lots of things could have changed. You know, somebody once said that the problem with contemporary Western society is everybody marries a stranger. By that they mean we marry quickly, often. And we're so blinded by infatuation that we don't see perhaps aspects of them that are there, and that when we do see them, it changes our feeling towards them. I mean, he or she, oh my goodness, they're so good looking in that, but when you see them first thing in the morning and their breath smells and, oh God, there's dirty underpants on the floor and, oh goodness me. So, I mean, there can be all sorts of things that change. Living in, I lived in Sri Lanka for 20 years. It's a very traditional and quite a conservative society. And it never surprised me that village people, simple people, their marriages are arranged. That never surprised me. That happens in most countries like Sri Lanka. But it always surprised me that very westernized, wealthy people who've studied overseas, that they are quite happy to let their parents pick a partner for them. That always surprised me. And what I found is such marriages are quite often quite successful. In fact, there's less divorce and less close relationships there than there would seem to be in our culture. And I think the reason for that is that they marry a stranger. Now, this idea of arranged marriages, there are different ways of doing that. In Sri Lanka, it's different from in India. In India, you don't even see your husband or your wife until the actual wedding ceremony. They don't do that in Sri Lanka. Usually they'll put an advertisement in the paper and somebody will come forward and they'll check out their astrological charts to see whether they're similar and what have you. And then they'll get them to go to the pictures together and they spend a month or 2 getting to know each other, at least being in each other's company. And then, so they don't marry without some relationship developing between them. But it's mum and dad who decide. And they've got a very nice way of doing it. If they've gone out 3 times together with a chaperone, and mum and dad ask the daughter, what do you think? I said, oh, I don't like him at all. They've got a wonderful way of dealing with that. Then when the parents of the boy comes around, they say, oh, she loves him, so she really likes him. And that I think they get on. Unfortunately, the astrological chart is, the astrologer told us that this won't work. And so the wedding is called off without anybody being hurt. It's really quite nice. Anyway, So in our culture, in Western culture, for the most part, we develop a romance towards a person, and then we marry them. And that's got its advantages too. But I think if we remember the common saying that love is blind, it quite often happens that we don't really have a realistic attitude towards the person we love before we marry them. Financially, will you be able to deal with it? And what if children come along and you lose your job or something like that? So there are all sorts of reasons why love can change. That's just some of them. But it is interesting to talk to people who have been married, and not just married, but happily married for decades. It's increasingly rare in Western cultures, but it still does exist. There are all sorts of reasons for this. We could go into that, but we'll do that another time. But it does happen. It's not that common, but it does happen. I think there's all sorts of things. They just grow together. There's a lot of give and take. They have a lot in common, or perhaps they have absolutely nothing in common other than they support each other. He likes fishing, she hates fishing. She likes sewing, he's not interested in it. So they don't have anything in common there, but they've grown together. Anything else?
Yes, thank you, Bhante. The next question is this, and it refers back to what, Bhante, you were talking about earlier about oily love. And I really love that analogy.
Oily.
How can you have a relationship which is always oily love? That is, no friction, no conflict.
Oh, I really... Look, you're speaking to somebody who isn't married. What do I know? But I suppose it's probably you find it in a marriage manual and that. Give and take. Not going to bed angry. Learning to put up with the other person's picadillos, whatever they happen to be. That's all I could say.
Thank you, Bhante. And just on that, maybe a bit of promotion. Bhante, this is your book, Like Milk and Water Mixed. And
you've got it there, I see. Oh.
And that comes from a sutta. That comes from the Buddha, where he talks about how people can live in such harmony,
like milk and water mixed.
Water mixed.
Blending together perfectly.
Yes.
Looking upon each other with the eyes of love.
Mm.
And it's an interesting one because it's contrasted with milk and water, and contrasting that with oil and water. You can shake them up and they'll appear to be mixed, but you let them sit for a while and they'll separate.
Yes,
and it's interesting to some of the things he says which can help promote that type of love. It's worth reading. If you're interested, the book is online, and maybe when we finish I'll give you the link to it and you can read it online.
Wonderful, thank you. And in fact, most of your books, if not all of your books, are free online as well.
They are, yes.
Yes, and we'll ensure that when we publish this talk on YouTube, that we will also include the links. So if people are interested,
good.
They can follow that too. And also for Metta Centre, we share a lot of information on our Facebook page, Instagram, as well as on WhatsApp. So if you'd like to join, just let us know and we'll add you on. And we'll also include the links to the books there as well. So watch that. Bhante, we have another question. The question is this: One prior. Hello, Venerable Dhammika. Thank you for your sharing. What is your view of forgiveness meditation in the context of forgiving oneself or others before moving back to practice metta meditation at a future time? And the background is the person who asked the question has previously practiced metta meditation.
Well, I've never heard of forgiveness meditation. If they sounds like a good idea, but I can't say it's certainly not a traditional form of meditation. Is the questioner there where they could tell me what it is?
Hi, Venerable. Yes, I'm here. It's Ben here. Is Ben here?
Benjamin,
Sorry,
is it?
Yes.
Yeah, yes, Benjamin, yes.
Yeah, the context was just I was practicing it for some time, and then I met some teachers who practice forgiveness meditation as well as metta meditation. And he suggested that why don't you try doing forgiveness meditation? So there is another Venerable Vimalaramaci who's based in the US who trained in Thailand previously. He has some sort of guided meditations on YouTube, so I've followed them. And the suggestion was once you feel like you've forgiven yourself, but also others, you can go back to metta meditation, and that will hopefully help with sort of that loving kindness practice that I was trying to do at the time. And what I've ended up doing is continue to do forgiveness meditation. I feel like it still gives me some value in terms of my practice. I do ponder, there's a point in time where should I go back to metta meditation? That's all. I just was wondering your view, given you talked a lot about love today and metta being one of them. Yeah,
but you didn't tell me what you actually do.
So it's not that different to metta. You definitely forgive yourself as one, and then you also practice forgiving others. So you visualize them. You can do it walking meditation as well. So one way is as you step left and right, I forgive you, you forgive me. So you can visualize that person, forgive them, and then also, of course, you can forgive yourself. So I forgive myself for not understanding, or I forgive myself for not making mistakes. So you constantly repeat a sentence that resonates. So it could be, I forgive myself for not understanding, and that could be not understanding certain things or getting angry at certain things, and I practice that for a period of time in the evening.
Okay. That sounds like a good idea. There is a type of meditation which seems to have attracted almost no attention amongst Western Buddhists, and it's called the Anussatis.
Anussatis.
Yeah, so Anusati means to be mindful again, or better would be to recollect, the recollections. So there are 8 of these. So recollecting the virtues of the Buddha, recollecting the virtues of the Dhamma, and so on and so on. But one of them is Sila-anussati, recollecting your own virtues. So in this meditation, when it seems to be appropriate, you sit and you simply think about, there's a difference between being mindful and contemplating. You might say we could divide Buddhist meditation into 3 types. There is using thoughts, which would be metta meditation or anussati, recollection meditation. Observing thoughts, that would be mindfulness meditation. And silencing thoughts, that would be some other types of meditation, concentration meditation. But in the first of these is, as many people understand meditation as they think, you've got to stop thinking. And when people say, oh, it's very hard to stop thinking, well, it isn't hard to stop thinking. Like you get a cricket bat, hit somebody over the head, and they will have no thoughts for at least 2 or 3 hours. So, and then I always say to them, thoughts are not the problem. Don't go to war with your thoughts. Properly disciplined and guided, thoughts can be very useful. They can be quite helpful. And that's what the Anussatis are. Anyway, one of the Anussatis is Sila-anussati. From time to time, and when it's appropriate, sit and think of the good that you have done. And hopefully there are a few things that you can think of. Now, I found that people quite often tell me, oh, I did it, I couldn't think of anything. But I saw them at the Buddhist Society last week do something. When everybody had finished, they packed up all the chairs. Nobody else did that. He did that. So what tends to happen when people think of doing good, they think of, like being like Mother Teresa and picking beggars out of the street. And yeah, that's very important if you can do that. But just the little things, an act of courtesy to somebody. Some time ago, I was walking down the street and I saw a guy trying to park his car in a very tight situation. So I just stopped and I waved him and, oh, stop. And I helped. And then I just walked on. I just saw somebody who I thought, small thing. It's not Mother Teresa stuff. But little things like that, if you are doing it, if you occasionally do things like that, sitting down and recollecting it can be very good. Now, I drew up a way of recollecting or contemplating such things based on the idea of Sila-anussati, and it has 4 parts. Perhaps I can send it later to Tina and she can pass it on to you. So first of all, thinking that you're good that you have done. There are various things to say to yourself as you do that and rejoicing in that. Then thinking of the good that others have done to you and recollecting that. And then thinking of the negative things that you've done and forgive yourself for that. And then thinking of the negative things that others have done to you and forgive them for that. So I'll pass that on to Tina, and perhaps she can pass that on to you. So yeah, I think that's a very good thing. However, I think you've got to be very careful about this. I think that if you're not careful, this can develop into a sort of self-congratulations, a way of, oh yes, I think I should forgive myself for that. Being in a bit too much of a hurry to forgive yourself. So every now and then, I think it's okay to feel bad about having done something bad. Let yourself stew with it for a while, but don't prolong it too much. I think most people are very anxious to forgive themselves. Well, yeah. Far less so of forgiving others. So as long as you keep that in mind, that it become a sort of not as helpful as it perhaps should be. So we were talking a little bit more previously about self-love. It's got 2 sides to it. It can be just self-congratulations and in a way that's not really very helpful, or it can be sincere and come after a period of contrition. Because sometimes I think almost everybody either deliberately or sort of inadvertently does something that harms others. Hopefully mainly by things that they've said. An odd, hurtful comment or something like that, not necessarily very wicked, but I think it's good. I think it shows sincerity if you're aware of a mistake that you've made and you feel bad about it for a while. But of course, some people overdo it. So that's my comments on that.
Thank you, Venerable.
Thank you, Venerable. Great tips. And Ben, it seems like you've started a real spark of conversation on the chat as well. So I invite you to read that as well. Bhante, it seems like we only have only time for one last question. So here it is. Can wishing someone or oneself to be well be a type of unconditional love, at least conditional in that it doesn't depend on what the loved one does or is?
Oh yeah, if you can do that, well and good. But don't fool yourself. I think there are certain negative states that almost nobody will admit to. Jealousy, for example, or envy. We may even, in our better moments, in fact, we even may boast that we hate a particular person, but envy, jealousy, is quite unattractive characteristics. I think also the capacity for self-deception amongst human beings is very pronounced. So I think being or trying to be genuinely sincere and honest about yourself. Most of us have got a side to ourselves which is not particularly attractive. It's probably not evil or wicked, but from a Buddhist perspective, it's nothing to write home about. And certainly some people can, or there can be a tendency to want to put a positive gloss on it or deny it to ourselves. And I think it's quite okay to deny it to others, but if you deny it to yourself, if you refuse to look at it, then I think you probably won't get very far, you won't mature. And I think that this is where a Kalyana Mitra can be really helpful. Somebody who can sometimes point out to you to things about yourself that you need to see. But they don't do it because they want to put you down or appear to be better than you. They do it because they really care about you. Perhaps they even really love you. And they're more likely to do it not to get back at you and not when they're angry at you, because you're much less likely to accept it at that time, but later on, just to gently point out, that was really not a very nice thing to say, was it? And I've noticed you do that a few times. Got to watch that. And if you're sincere, that can hurt. It's not good for our egos. But if we really have a Kalyana Mitra, and they're a skillful Kalyana Mitra, in that sense, they can be very, very helpful. I used to have one who was almost the perfect. Always knew the right thing to say, how to put it, and when to say it. And say it in such a gentle and loving way that you really had no choice but to accept it. Okay, is that it, is it?
It is. Thank you so much for your sharing your wisdoms, the teaching, and your time and your patience in answering our questions. I'm going to pass now the microphone, the virtual microphone, over to Sophia. Sophia.
She's disappeared.
I am still here.
Oh, here she is.
Thank you very much, Bhante, for your wisdom and talk, and thank you everyone for your participation tonight. Bhante, before we wrap up, we usually do a bit of dedication of merit / bit of prayer, so it depends on which one you feel comfortable with. Would you like to do that before we wrap up?
Oh yeah, I think we can do something like that.
Yeah.
Okay, we've been fortunate to be able to come together, even at a distance, to talk about and discuss the Dhamma. I certainly enjoyed sharing some of my ideas with you, and I hope you found some of them helpful. And also thank you for your questions. All of them, I think, were very sensible and to the point questions, and unusually they were related to the theme of the talk, which doesn't always happen. So that is a very positive thing to be able to do that. And I hope you take away from some of the things that I've said, something that is of value to you. And now we will share the merit with all beings everywhere. Idam minati nang hotu sukita hantu natayo. Idam minati nang hotu sukita hantu natayo. Idam minati nang hotu sukita hantu natayo. Akasanta cha bummanta deva naga mahindika punyang tang anumodetva chirang rankantu sasanam. Akasanta cha bummanta deva naga mahindika punyang tang anumodetva chirang rankantu desanam. Akasanta cha bummanta deva naga mahindika punyang tang anumodetva chirang rankantu parang.